about 29 years after Muhammad's death, during the rule of the third Caliph, Uthman bin Affan, a standard copy of the Quran in a book form was made because already divergent readings and copies were circulating in the growing Islamic empire. This Uthmanic recension, according to Muhammadan view, was produced with meticulous care based on earlier copies of the Quran made according to the instructions of Muhammad. Orthodox Muhammadans insist that no changes have occurred to the Quran since the Uthmanic recension. But this view is challenged by many of their own records, as we have shown in several of our chapters, as well as by the Sana'a manuscripts, which date from shortly after the Uthmanic recension. There are diacritical and phonetical variations that don't make any sense in the text, says Puin. The Arabic script is very defective, even more so in the early stages of its literature. Like other early Arabic literature, the Sana'a Quran was written without any diacritical marks, vowel symbols, or any guide to how it should be read. Puin adds, the text was written so defectively that it can be read in a perfect way only if you have a strong oral tradition. The Sana'a text, just like other early Qur'ans, was a guide to those who knew it already by memory, he says. Those that were unfamiliar with the Quran would read it differently because there were no diacritical and vowel symbols. As years went by, the correct reading of the Quran became less clear, he says. People made changes to make sense of the text. Puin gives us example Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi, governor of Iraq from 694 to 714 AD, who was proud of inserting more than 1,000 alifs, first letter of the Arabic alphabet, in the Quranic text. Professor Alan Jones, lecturer in Quranic studies at Oxford University, agrees. Al-Hajjaj is also responsible for putting the diacritical marks in the Quran. His changes are a defining moment in the history of the Quran. After the Hajjaj's changes in around the year 700s, the Quranic text became pretty stable, he says. Puin accepts this up to a point, but says that certain words and pronunciations were standardized in the 9th century. He says the Uthmanic text was the skeleton upon which many layers of interpretation were added, causing the text to be changed. This is of course blasphemy to Orthodox Muhammadans and is not entirely accepted by some other academics. Puin's other radical theory is that pre-Islamic sources have entered the Quran. He argues that two tribes it mentions, Ashab al-Ra's, companions of the well, and Ashab al-A'iqah, companions of the thorny bushes, are not part of the Arab tradition, and the people of Muhammad's time certainly did not know about them. These are very unspecific names, whereas other tribes are specifically mentioned, said Dr. Puin. His researches have shown that al-Ras lived in pre-Islamic Lebanon and al-A'iqah in Aswan, the region of Egypt, around 150 AD, according to the Atlas of Ptolemy. He argues that pre-Islamic sources entered the Quran, presumably when the growing Islamic empire came into contact with those regions and sources. Puin also questions another sacred belief that Muhammadans hold about the Quran, that it was written in the purest Arabic. He has found many words of foreign origin in the text, including the word Quran itself. Muslim scholars explain the Quran to mean recitation, but Puin argues that it is actually derived from an Aramaic word, qariyun, meaning a lectionary of scripture, portions appointed to be read at divine service. He says the Quran contains most of the biblical stories, but in a shorter and altered form, and is like a summary of the Bible to be read in service. Orthodox Muhammadans have always held, although without a single thread of evidence, that the Quran is a scripture in its own right, and never a shortened version of the Bible, even if both texts contain the same prophetic tradition. Muhammadans, for obvious religious reasons, are always accusing any and all those who question anything about the Quran as being anti-Islam. They are weary of constant attempts by Western Islamists to analyze the Quran in a parallel way to the Bible. Not all Muhammadan reaction to him has been hostile. Salim Abdullah, director of the German Islamic Archives, affiliated to the powerful Pan-Islamic Muslim World League, has given him a positive response. He asked me if I could give him the permission to publish one of my articles on the Sana'a manuscripts, said Puin. Warned of the possible controversy it would raise, Salim replied, "I am longing for this kind of discussion on this topic. Any questioning of the authenticity of the Quranic text as the word of Allah can expect a hostile reaction. A death sentence was issued against Salman Rushdie for hinting in satanic verses that the Quran includes verses from other sources, chiefly Satan. Academics offering radical interpretations of the Quran put their lives at risk. In 1990, Dr. Nasser Abu Zaid, formerly a lecturer in Quranic studies at Cairo University, provoked a national outcry in Egypt over his book, The Concept of the Text. There were death threats from Mohammedan fundamentalists, general public harassment, and in 1995 he was branded an apostate by Egypt's highest court. The court forced him to divorce his wife because under Sharia law, marriage between an apostate and a Mohammedan is forbidden. Zaid's proposal was arguably less radical than Puin's. Zaid's book only argued that the Quran is a literary text and the only way to understand, explain and analyze it is through a literary approach. A Mohammedan himself, Zaid remained in Egypt for a time to refute the apostasy charges, but fled with his wife to Holland in the face of increasing death threats. Puin believes that he will not receive the same reaction because unlike Zaid or Rushdie, he does not have a Mohammedan name. His claim that the Quran has changed since its supposed standardization and that pre-Islamic texts have crept in would nonetheless be regarded as highly blasphemous by Mohammedans. He has not yet written a book on these radical findings, but says it is a goal to achieve in the near future. Dr. Tarif Khalidi, lecturer in Islamic studies at Cambridge University, warns that the book may generate a controversy similar to the satanic verses. Dr. Puin's views are taken up and trumpeted in the media, and if you don't have many Muslims being rational about it, then all hell may break loose. Khalidi fears Mohammedans will not accept Puin's work on the Sana'a manuscripts as having been done with academic objectivity, but see it as a deliberate attack on the integrity of the Quranic text. Ladies and gentlemen, I, for one, am sick and tired of hearing about Muslim anger whenever some scholar questions anything about the Quran. As I have mentioned before, the fundamentalist followers of Muhammad exhibit an obscene degree of hypocrisy and mendacity, since they never cease or shrink from attacking and insulting the beliefs of the Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Jews, Sikhs, Baha'is, atheists, etc. They do so incessantly in all forms of news media and their school curriculums without fear of retaliation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mohammedans are angry out of an inordinate degree of fear. Fear that the world would get to know how inauthentic and ungodly their cult belief system is. They are also emulating their mentor Muhammad Sunnah, since he had any and all those who questioned or disagreed with him assassinated, as we have shown in our previous chapters. They are doing their worst at terrorizing and silencing all investigations of their Quran. The Internet, as a medium of education, is turning out to be their worst nightmare. We shall continue to enlighten humanity no matter what their threats may be, and we need your support in spreading the word.